question that I'm most interested in is not, can we measure people's empathy with robots? It's, can we change people's empathy with robots? So could we use robots therapeutically with children, with prisoners, with anyone really, to make them more empathic? And there's a flip side to that question, which is, could it be desensitizing to people to behave violently towards very lifelike robotic objects that respond in a lifelike way? Because as we increasingly interact with the technology and the technology gets better at mimicking lifelike responses or even real conversations, that type of thing, I wonder, and I particularly wonder about children, right? So there was a study in Japan, I think it was last year or the year before, and they were using this mall patrol robot that would patrol the shopping mall. And they noticed that very small children, unsupervised, would go and kind of harass and beat up the robot. It's terrible and funny at the same time. There's videos in the study of children hitting the robot over the head with a bottle. And what they ended up doing was they ended up programming the robot so that it would avoid people below a certain height and move towards taller people, which is funny. But so the question for me here is, do we reach a point where there are reasons to stop our children from behaving violently towards lifelike robots that go beyond respecting other people's property? Like, is there any way that they could become desensitized to violence towards living things, the better that technology can mimic living things? And some people have already raised this question about children's behavioral patterns and whether they can adopt behavioral patterns from interacting with the virtual assistants that we have today. So there was a really positive story in the New York Times a few years ago by a mother who was talking about how her autistic son had developed a relationship with Siri, Apple's voice assistant. And she said it was the best thing ever because Siri is infinitely patient. She will answer every question repeatedly and consistently, and apparently that's really important for autistic kids. But also because the voice recognition is so bad, he had learned to articulate his words really clearly, and that had improved his communication with other people. So that's great, right? I mean, it's great, except that Siri isn't designed to work with autistic children. So you might have some other unintended or even negative effects of interacting with this technology too. And so this one guy started complaining. He wrote a blog post about how Amazon Echo is turning his kid into an asshole because Alexa doesn't require any please or thank you or any of the standard politeness that you want when you're conversing with someone and asking them to do things for you. So, the better the technology gets, the more you have to wonder whether this gets muddled in kids' subconscious and maybe even in our own subconscious. So, what if the problem isn't that if we teach the robots to kick, that they'll come back and kick our asses? What if we first need to ask what it does to us if we kick the robots? So in other words, this is a little provocative, but if it's your job to kick a dog-like robot every day to test its stability, and if you imagine if that looked a little bit more like a real dog, could you become desensitized just a tiny bit in your subconscious to kicking your dog at home? I don't know. I feel bad for this guy because he's in all my slides and I always raise this question. I'm like, if you ever see this man, I owe him a beer and an apology. But we don't know, and we've asked this question before in other areas of technology, so violence in video games, for example, and we haven't really come to a conclusive answer for violence in video games. We've kind of decided that maybe for kids, not so good. Adults can probably distinguish between what's on a screen and what's in real life, and even if we did have an answer, I think that we need to ask the question again because physicality here, the visceral response that we have to physical action, I think, brings us to a new level where we have to ask the question again. And you see this also in gaming where new technologies like VR and AR are making gaming a more physical experience as well. But again, like, we don't have the answers. It could also be, very well be, that it is a very healthy outlet for violent behavior to beat up a robot dog, and that you're much nicer to your dog at home if you have that outlet. And we don't know what direction this goes in. And just to hammer home how important I think this is, I don't want to get too dark here, but one sensitive issue that I've been thinking about a lot recently is the use of child-sized sex robots and whether that should be allowed or not. It is a question that we're going to be facing pretty soon. It is a question that different countries have already grappled with in the case of virtual child pornography and in the case of dolls that are the size of children. And like, we literally have no idea whether this is something that could be helpful because it is an outlet for undesirable sexual behavior that ends up, preventing real child abuse, or whether it's something that propagates and encourages behaviors. And it's also something that's very difficult to research.